Today on the Criss Cross Cinema Podcast, two tales of obsession and illusion, The Illusionist and The Prestige. But are they magical masterpieces or fantastic flops? On the Criss Cross Cinema Podcast.
Two fellows meet accidentally, like you and me. No connection between them at all. Never saw each other before. They swap murders. Crisscross.
Wilson! I'm sorry, Wilson! A day may come when the courage of men fails. But it is not this day.
You gotta keep breathing, because tomorrow the sun will rise. Who knows what the tide could bring?
Hello, and welcome to the Criss Cross Cinema Podcast, where we crisscross cinema history to find connections you may have never recognized. Today's movies both come to us from 2006, The Illusionist and The Prestige. My name is Aaron Wilson, and I was working in the movie theater when these movies came out.
And my name is Mark Klobus, and I was not in either of these theaters when these movies were being shown. So these were brand new to me when you first proposed them.
Yeah, I have to admit, most of The Illusionist I've seen in chunks on my breaks. But it seemed, well, I'm not going to go into too much spoilers, but it seemed like a better movie.
It is,
that.
It is, and it's definitely one that I ended up judging based upon the comparison, but it is one that is fascinating to watch, and I'm glad I watched that one first, and that we're starting with that one first. So, if
you like what you hear on today's show, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/transcendentertainment. That's TRANSCEND Entertainment. On today's show, as always, we'll review our two films, and at the end, we go crisscross to compare and contrast them both. But first, Mark, what have you been watching?
Well, I've been. I was traveling, and that gave me the opportunity to sample a streaming service that I don't normally have access to, and that was Max. And so I decided to get caught up on The Gilded Age, which it's Julian Fellowes, and he has some very interesting socioeconomic attitudes that come through in his work, but it's very enjoyable. I must confess I like the soap opera element a bit, but it's also, I mean, it just fascinates me the quality of acting in that. Is
that like Upstairs, Downstairs?
Apparently it was originally proposed, or at some point was going to be a Downton Abbey prequel.
Oh, okay.
And because Fellows he had done Downton Abbey before he did this. And so it's the same thing. There is a bit of an upstairs, downstairs element, but there's also, and I think this is where it really differs, is that it's about these clash between these two families, one who is kind of like old money, but not quite as much old money as there once was, versus nouveau riche and tons of riches, and how the new is trying to, insert themselves into the old and how that happens. And I mean, it just works where, in the first season you watch it, and you feel like so many actors are wasted. I mean, Christine Baranski's in it, and she is basically there on, making asides. She doesn't really seem to be integrated. They make even less use of Cynthia Nixon, but they make, conversely, Morgan Spector, who is an actor I didn't really pick up on until I saw this, and he's amazing, and Carrie Coon, and of course there are all these other actors involved as well. In the second season, they do more. I think they do a better job of utilizing this enormous array of talent. They're drawing from, and it's one of those shows that really seems connected to theater. So you bring in all these great theater actors, and maybe they're there for a performance or two, but they're always just on, and they're doing a great job, and it just really is enjoyable. It's like I said, it's very sanitized, but it's fun for me at least.
Yeah. Well, it's close to the holidays, so I just watched Home Alone, and that movie, structure-wise, I was just admiring it. Kevin's character arc is just amazing. Like, you don't notice it watching that when you're a kid because you don't know about those things, but. And, well, most people don't know about those things. That's why I'm here. He starts out wishing his family away. They disappear, and he's like, my family disappeared. He's like, my family disappeared. And then halfway through the movie, he starts missing his family again. And you start seeing him, like there's that beautiful scene in the church where he meets the guy that's also estranged from his son. And it brings in that theme, and they just do it so beautifully. And all these scenes where it seems like you think of Home Alone, and you think it's, him doing the booby traps to the bad guys. Mm-hmm. But that's just the third act. I didn't realize that until last year when I saw it. I'm like, that's really not that much of that movie. And most of it is him dealing with his relationship with his family and how that changes, and he starts to miss them more. And then at the end, he's like, it would be nice if they came back. And then, I don't know. It's beautiful the way they do it.
The thing I find fascinating about that is that there is an arc there that I distinctly recall seeing in so many Last Man on Earth movies.
Oh,
All
yeah.
these movies that, if you go back to, like, say, the 1950s, when you have, like, these atomic wars, and of course, because they're doing them on the cheap, they're atomic wars where the people are gone, but the buildings are there, and there's always that protagonist or two or three who are the survivors, and how you see them sort of initially it's kind of like, hey, wow, we actually own the earth now, and it's all fun, and then they realize, gosh, it gets so lonely, and they kind of realize the virtue of community, the value of community, and they build upon that by the end of it. So it's funny you mentioned that, though, because that movie did seem to have a moment this season, because there was suddenly this article that I saw everywhere on social media about calculating McAllister's worth. How much money did they have to be doing this stuff?
Yeah.
So I guess for some reason it just kind of broke through, kind of peaked its head up a little bit higher this holiday season.
Yeah, written by John Hughes. So it makes you wonder what his life is like. But anyway, yeah, their house is crazy. But okay, so let's get to our review. Just like always, we'll be diving deep. Fair warning, here there be spoilers. So, without further ado, let's start our review of The Illusionist.
Now, The Illusionist, like I said, is a film I hadn't seen until now, and I this kind of gets to one of the themes that sometimes comes up for me when we approach these films, the films that are kind of contiguous, that happen around the same time,
right?
And it always fascinates me how it is that happens. This idea that, so does one studio executive open the trades and sees this film is being done? It's like, we should do one of our own, and he snaps his fingers and his underlings set to it, or do they have spies planted on these boards and they're having these conversations, and then they're working on this, we've got to work on our own.
You're thinking of like the ants and Bugs Life, and
exactly
those kinds of
how suddenly you see the same premise or seemingly the same concept popping up and coming out at exactly the same time. Not your mockbusters. I mean, that was pretty
like
obvious.
Twin films is what they call them.
Yeah.
Like Armageddon and Deep Impact, and kind of ironic that we call them twin films. It's coming up. Well, we're in spoilers, but
but The Illusionist is and for me though, I think one of the reasons why I never saw these films when they were out was because it's they kind of cancel each other out for me. It's like I see both of them, and it's kind of like, okay, sometimes I don't have the bandwidth to go see both. I've got to choose one. Which one do I choose?
Wasn't a Barbenheimer situation back then.
Exactly. Like, for example, going back to Ants and A Bug's Life, at the time I saw Ants.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay. And because of that, but I was kind of like, that was the movie I could see it. I had the time for. I missed A Bug's Life in the theater. And then I saw it later, and I'm kind of like, what the heck was I thinking? A Bug's Life. So in that respect, and so that's one of the reasons why I missed this. But so it was interesting visiting them. And it's interesting because also how the disproportionate level they have nowadays. That I mean, I constantly see references to The Prestige, and part of it's Nolan and his stature, but it also is a film that I think has so much more
Prestige.
Yeah, prestige. Yeah, for like if we're going to use it in a different context than in The Illusionist. So I made it a point because of that to seek out The Illusionist first.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it's interesting how I hate to say this, it kind of tries too hard. I mean, you have that opening, and with the opening credits, and you have the dramatic orchestral music. You have, and it's by one of my all-time favorite composers, Philip Glass, and he gets some grief for being a little repetitive.
Philip Glass, I didn't even know that. Yeah, he wrote he didn't write the score, but he was the inspiration for the score of one of my favorite TV shows, Fringe. So,
oh, really?
Whenever I hear his name, I'm like, oh.
Oh, that's a fantastic show. But then you have that dramatic orchestral music, so it's very much period music, and of course it's all sepia toned, and it's like saying, here we are in the 19th century, we're underscoring it. And was the entire movie tinted that way? I
think it was. I think the flashbacks were much more like they did the flickering movie look, but the whole thing definitely had that color grade to it.
Again, it's trying too hard, and I think it actually ruins something that they do in the movie.
Okay.
Which is, and this is something I looked up, that I'm watching the movie and I'm watching the magical effects, and,
Right.
and we'll be getting to that in just a minute. And it's they seem like CGI,
Yeah, they definitely do.
and yet they're not.
Oh, they aren't?
Yeah, they are.
Oh.
So many. They made it a point to do as many practical magical tricks as possible.
Oh, cool.
And this is where you get to one of the connecting threads between the two movies, and that's Ricky Jay, who was he passed on a few years back. He was a masterful magician, and he was he's a magician you see in a lot of movies. He was in House of Games, the David Mamet movie,
Oh, okay.
for example, and he is actually in The Prestige. He's the magician.
Is he the older magician
the
they
Michael
were working
magician,
for? Yeah.
exactly, when they were working as shills.
Yeah.
And he doesn't appear in The Illusionist, but he was a consultant and he worked with them on the tricks.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they made it a point to do that, and yet because of the sepia tone, because of the visual effects that they insert to try to, we're going to go ahead and make this seem like very 19th century-ish, it kind of defeats the purpose.
Right. Yeah. Right on that note, these tricks that they do in there, they seem impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I only in looking at it afterwards, and I saw an interview with a magician guy that said they're all possible, and I'm like, well, it doesn't matter because to the audience, they seem impossible, and that's the biggest problem I have with this movie. It has impossible magic tricks,
Yes.
and mostly because they don't explain it to you. In the Prestige, not to get too far into it yet, they explain all the magic tricks.
Yes, they do.
So I'll get into that when we get into Prestige.
But that's an excellent point, and I think it goes back to it kind of, and that lends itself to what my point that I'm talking about here, which is that it feels like we're going to just go ahead and do this all via CGI, and yet they didn't. And
Yeah.
it actually has the effect of cheapening what they did
Yeah,
by doing so.
definitely.
But it's also the other, and I know we're going to do the comparison near the end, but the other thing that struck me about both these films is how they work with disjointed timelines.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was watching The Illusionist was I was marveling over how much they lean into it in a way that seems so clunky.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah.
You have that opening where you have Edward Norton, just his character's name is Eisenheim, and he's just doing the Edward Norton thing, just sitting there staring, and you're like, what the heck's going on? And then you have the illusion, and then Officer Paul Giamatti.
Officer Paul Giamatti. Yeah, I know.
He's
remember his name either.
I mean, his name is Ulf. He's in there, and he's wonderful in this. He's the only. I'll get to that in a minute, but he stands up and declares this is shut down. The police show up, and then you have him, go to Prince Rufus Sewell, or Prince Leopold, as his character's name is,
Right.
and of course, it's Rufus Sewell. I like him in a lot of things. He's an actor. I think, frankly, doesn't get quite the same appreciation. He tends to get boxed into these bad guy roles.
Yeah, I'm thinking Knight's Tale.
Yeah,
yeah.
The Man of the High Castle. He's such a better actor than that. I mean, if you want to see an example of that, go watch Dark City.
Oh, okay.
Which-
I've got to see that. I
Yeah.
haven't seen it.
That's one of the ones where he's not playing the bad guy. He's playing the protagonist, and he does such a good job of it. But I don't know what it is, but they always seem to put him in that role, and I'm honestly a little surprised I don't give him a mustache tutorial in this one because
Right. Yeah.
well, that's probably a little unfair because they do try to make him more nuanced. This is one of the things about the movie I enjoyed the most. But they go to him, all goes to him, Paul Giamatti's character, and basically says, we've shut it down, and then they have to have this extended recap, and 2/3 of this film is just this extended flashback. And after a while, I'm kind of thinking, is this really the best approach they could have done with this material?
Yeah.
Did they have to make 2/3 of the film a flashback, and just one long flashback? And I have to say, it is fascinating to look up in the notes and see that the actor playing young Eisenheim is Aaron Taylor Johnson.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize his younger face.
I know he's just so impossibly young in this.
Yeah.
And it kind of gets to something that I felt, which is that there's a lot of acting talent in this film,
Yeah, there definitely is.
and yet it's so underutilized.
Yeah.
I mean,
The script, well,
go ahead.
okay. I'm just gonna say it's not the best. I saw it was written by the director, and that was kind of. I don't want to be hard on him because I don't know anything about him, but it was kind of a red flag for me of this could go one of two ways. Could be a Nolan thing, or it could be I don't know.
Yeah, it's another interesting point of comparison. I honestly I hadn't really quite clicked onto, which was the fact that these are both director-written movies,
right?
So, but you had this flashback where you're seeing this relationship between young Eisenheim and this Duchess Sophie, and it's one that, and this gets to where the historian in me is kind of going, okay, this is so wrong on so many levels.
Yeah.
I mean, we're setting aside the fact that Prince Leopold is an entirely fictional character who was kind of a fictionalized version of a prince at the time who does end up committing suicide in I think it was 1889.
Mm-hmm.
It's this idea that you'd have this young peasant boy who can somehow socialize with the Duchess. I'm thinking, where's the governess? Because these, especially when you're talking about the aristocracy, royalty, they're constantly surrounded by servants one of whose job which was to keep the hoi polloi away from the young'uns. Because, but of course we have to completely hand wave that away, because then you don't have the relationship, which is
that's the core of this movie, and that's where the genres part for me with these two movies. This one is a melodrama.
Oh, it is,
like through and through.
It is, and it's such a belabored one. It's so it's kind of overdone in its melodrama, and it does definitely detract from it.
And the pacing doesn't help it. It goes so slow. It's like this is the only thing happening. This little love triangle, and I'm getting ahead of myself. But
but then you get to the present, and this gets to the thing about the film that probably bugged me the most, which is the fact that Edward Norton is the star. Yeah. His character is at the center of it, and he seems about as multidimensional as a piece of paper. He does. Yeah, he's a magician. He's attracted to Duchess Sophie, and that's it.
That's about it. Yeah, they try to set up this mystique about him of nothing, but to the audience, all that sets up is boredom.
Yeah, it's like, what is there to really know about him? Should we even care about it? The person I care about in this movie is the Inspector All.
Yeah, he's almost the main character.
He is, and I can't tell if that's the writing or the fact that Paul Giamatti is that good of an actor. Yeah, it's like when I watch him in Paycheck, which is
I didn't realize I'd forgotten he was in that.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, I have a fondness for that film that very few people have. But it's like when he shows up on the screen, he practically, in a very subtle way, kind of yanks the film away from Ben Affleck.
That's funny, yeah.
So, but I mean, he does such a good job. I mean, he more than any other single element makes this film watchable for me, because, and although I have to give credit to the writer, because he makes him multifaceted. In the sense that you see him going to performances, he genuinely loves the magic. Yeah, he loves trying to figure stuff out. When he is dealing with Eisner, which is actually a persona that Norton's character adopts, he interacts with him, friendly. There's kind of a playfulness. I mean, the fact that Norton is just sitting here being, I'm going to be, kind of intense about these things. I'm not going to engage on that level. Yeah, kind of underscores the element of the two-dimensionality that is Norton's contribution or lack thereof. But it's like he really is in so many ways the real protagonist in that respect. And you see him kind of trying to be fair to Eisenheim while at the same time doing his job. You get the impression he's very good at what he does. Yeah. But he's kind of enjoying the magic. But then you have Leopold stepping in, and of course, who's Leopold's date at the performance?
His girlfriend from earlier.
Duchess Sophie is there as an adult.
That's a great transition to one of the. I hate being harsh on this film, but one of the few positives that I saw in this was the way they introduced her again. Mm-hmm. She comes in and she's the one that's going to be part of the act, and he's like, "Do I know you?" Like right after we can see in his face that he's recognized her. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't recognize him, and she's like, "No," and it's just part of the magician thing. Do I know you? And I don't know. I thought that was
I kind of
clever.
thought she did recognize him, but she was kind of very quick to stifle it because she was
Oh, okay.
aware of the boundaries. That was just my read of it. I mean, I might have been reading something into it, but I got the impression that she did pick up on him early at the beginning.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But because you do have the whole, she is aware of his magic. You have the MacGuffin of the necklace.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
No, it's a pretty weak MacGuffin, but yeah.
It's pretty MacGuffin. I mean, it's a great little necklace. I mean,
Yeah,
I was
it's
kind
kind
of
of cool.
Yeah,
But it's another impossible magic thing. You see it twist around, and then it opens up, and there's a picture in there. That picture would be ripped. But
yeah, and of course there's you can morph it into a heart. Basically, it was like if a transformer was a necklace.
yeah,
This was the necklace
in
1889 or whatever. Yeah, exactly. So and this is where I kind of feel the writers do Leopold dirty, because throughout most of the film, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, why is he the antagonist? Apart from the fact that he happens to be betrothed, or Sophie is betrothed to him.
yeah, the third leg of the love triangle.
Yeah, because you watch the movie and he's talking about how he is. There's a line in there about how he's trying to talk about reason and he's trying to find explanations for things. I'm thinking, why is that a bad thing? He's actually he's going to be leading the Austro-Hungarian Empire at some point in the future, supposedly.
Right.
And he's talking about how he wants to lead his people out of superstition. He wants to dispel the magic. I'm thinking, this is a bad thing.
Yeah.
How? Because
Kind of only if you're a magician, I guess.
yeah, exactly. So, but of course, so he gets all to do it, and all who has that balance of, he enjoys the magic, but he also recognizes it for what it is, and kind of has that proper balance to it. He has to, now start being more involved. Then you have the private performance where Leopold tries to debunk Eisenheim, and I can understand why.
Yeah, I kind of enjoyed that. That was good.
That was an enjoyable one. But at the same time, again, it's like, yes, Eisenheim shows him up, and yes, he kind of, I can understand why he does that. But it's like, what was the negative motivation there? Especially since at that point, he doesn't know that Sophie and Eisenheim were an item. So
Yeah.
he's just trying to promote reason over superstition.
But it's all kind of drenched in this melodramatic, emotional lens.
Exactly.
So, well, almost literally, they have this color grade over the whole thing. That
Exactly.
Makes it, yeah.
Exactly. And it's about giving Leopold reasons to hate Eisenheim,
Right.
so that he can become a villain. And this, again, is if I feel like the script does him dirty, because it's like, he's not that bad of a guy until you get to the point where you have that big confrontation between him and Sophie, and is the second act that would take place.
Yeah. Where it ends up, he actually kills her.
Yeah. After Eisenheim is shut down by the authorities, he's kind of working on his plan. He's got Sophie on board, and this is where Leopold kind of shows his inner meanness, and this is where you can start to hate him. But at the same time, he's being manipulated. They're doing it in a way because Eisenheim needs to get to a certain point. He has the plot. They're carrying out the plot. They need to basically poke the bear.
Right.
And I'm not saying that to excuse what Leopold does when he
From the audience's point of view, though, like, you don't know that there's any kind of plan going on, which is a big problem.
Yeah.
I'll get to that, but yeah.
And but they execute the plan, and then Sophie is found dead, and somehow this doctor can just pronounce her dead, and there's no autopsy. There's no, because they didn't have autopsies back then, and there's
Right.
no. And they could just say, the doctor could say that and sort of shoo away any closer investigation, which is, as obviously very convenient. And then, of course, Eisenheim decides he's going to go, and from being a illusionist to being a magician to being to hold these seances.
Right. Yeah, that was a big turn. That was the most interesting thing for me watching it the first time. Just these clips that I saw as I was watching it in the theater. I didn't know much about the story, but these seance parts were pretty cool, where he was conjuring these goats, leaving that in, where he's conjuring these ghosts. This spiritualism was a big thing back then because it was like right after World War One, and was it?
No, this is before World War
Oh,
One.
was it? Well, spiritualism became much more of a thing after that. But,
No, but you see antecedents of it before that, and it's one of the things I think we sometimes don't appreciate, which is that when you had the emergence of science in the 17th, 18th centuries as a field unto itself, and this is something I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but they really play up with the Prestige, which is the idea about how it seems that with science anything is possible.
yeah, that definitely plays into that point.
Yeah, and it's a sense of wonder that we don't have as much anymore. We tend to have different reactions, but there is this. I mean, when you can have electricity arcing, when you can have horseless carriages moving under their own power.
Seems like magic.
Yeah, and it's like, well, maybe it is possible to contact the dead. Maybe it is something that we can do with with training and with discipline and maybe with a device or two, and so it seemed entirely plausible. I mean, it really takes off with the First World War. You're absolutely right, but you can see elements of it. I mean, I think Houdini was.
Yeah, he was big into debunking spiritualists.
And I think he was doing that before World War One. And I think I can't remember when Conan Doyle really got into that as well. But you have and the thing is, and this goes back to what I was talking about, the practical tricks. What they have Eisenheim doing is something that was possible with the techniques of magic at the time.
Yeah, I was just about to say this. Half of the reason why that made me really interested when I saw that, because I knew how they do that trick. They actually have the people below the stage, and then they have a piece of glass turned at a 45-degree angle, reflecting actually, I guess it's two pieces of glasses, so it's like a periscope, or I guess it would have to be a mirror on the bottom, but it reflects the people down on the bottom of the stage. They have a light that lights them up really bright, so they reflect in there, and then they reflect back up to the glass, and so they look transparent in front of the illusionist. And it's like, oh, it's a ghost, and
it's so well done. It is a practical effect, and yet you're thinking it's cheesy CGI because it's so over the
overproduced,
exactly. So and again, this is where I'm like, why is Leopold the bad guy? Because Eisenheim is causing a panic in Vienna. People are freaking out about this. Right. And it's like,
making
why?
Civil problems.
And he's doing it deliberately to undermine Leopold. Yeah. So you have people just asking questions, and in which is a little bit different, in the Viennese monarchy of the 19th century than it is today. Right. Which is creating real civil unrest. And Leopold's orders an investigation. They figure out parts of the trick, but they never do that full explanation.
Yeah, it's interesting. But this just made me chuckle. When they were recreating the trick, they used a projector, and the image they were projecting was color. And I'm like, color projection in 1889? Yeah. I don't think so.
I mean, you could do it if you hand tinted every frame.
Yeah, but back then, the way it was usually just one color wash, like you make it green or you make it red.
Yeah, you see that when you can see this with all sorts of YouTube clips nowadays of old films from the time, how they do that.
That's exactly
this is how we're going to do night, and so forth. So, but as these appearances grow more elaborate, they have to shut them down, and that takes us back to the beginning of the movie. So we are now nearly an hour and 15 minutes in the movie, and we've just finished the flashback.
Yeah.
And the thing is that the transition is seamless, which some people might think is a good thing. For me, it's kind of like, oh, now we're back to the present, because then it seems like that like half the movie up to this point has been the Viennese police his performances or trying to stop Eisenheim. It just seems kind of messy. And
you have to be careful to orient your audience. Like Nolan is an expert at the non-linear thing. Like,
oh my gosh,
he should have gone to Nolan to get some pointers, I guess.
Of course, Nolan's probably like, I can't help it right now. I'm busy working on my own non-linear movie about magic.
Yeah, it goes backwards. Yeah,
just watch Memento and figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, right. We should cover Memento at some point.
Oh, definitely. But of course, we have the fact that Eisenheim now has a cult.
Right.
And this gets to the two-dimensionality, which I have such an issue with, which is that, is this part of his plan? Is this an unexpected side effect? Is he doing this as a flex? Is he doing this to humiliate Leopold?
Yeah, it's just left mysterious.
So but now you get to the point, you're building to the denouement, which is that now Eisenheim's conjuring Sophie. And this is where I really kind of feel Edward Norton overplays it, because you can see the pain look on his face reaching out. And I don't know if that's
melodrama all over the place.
Yes, and I don't know if that's Edward Norton's intentional play to the melodrama, or that's just Edward Norton being Edward Norton.
Yeah.
Because, and this goes back to how, Giamatti, I don't get a sense of melodrama from him.
Yeah, that's true. He's a very level, balanced character.
Yeah, he's playing it straight, and I think it's one of the reasons why he's such a good kind of a good foundation for the movie.
Yeah, I don't know if I said this, but he's kind of the framing device for the movie. If he tells the flashback, and then I guess I didn't recognize that the 2/3 of the movie was in flashback, but it's him telling it. So.
And it's only after you get to the point where they've gone back and reshown the breaking up of the seance performance that you realize.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
because the narration drops away, and now it's just they're playing it out, and so you have, Eisenheim summoning Sophie, and he's using her mere presence to throw shade on the heir to the empire. Why is he the good guy in this scenario?
Yeah.
I mean, you could argue Leopold's not the greatest guy, but what Eisenheim's doing is basically revolution.
Yeah, basically.
So
with his little spiritualist cults.
Yes, and then of course when Eisenheim, despite prohibitions, does another performance and summons Sophie, he then disappears. And you're like, okay, I mean, it's the same trick, but how did pull off? There's no. It's just he's just that good.
Yeah.
But of course, he's now sown enough clues to where the doubt that Leopold's under a cloud of doubt all finds the locket in the stable,
right?
And he confronts Leopold, and again, Leopold, not blameless. He did it. He did beat on Sophie. He did threaten her, but he's basically being gaslit at this point.
Yeah, it's true.
And
we're being gaslit as the audience.
Yeah, we're being gaslit as the audience. Leopold is apparently the bad guy. He feels like he's done nothing wrong, and he goes about it the wrong way. He basically is like, you can't touch me. But it turns out that all is already taking it to the military. So the military is going to show up and arrest him, and so Leopold decides, well, there's only one way out, and it reminds me of that line from Shawshank Redemption about when the warden kills himself, about how I wonder if the last thought he had was how this happened to him,
right?
Because you think about it from his perspective, he has his betrothed fiance who's supposed to be this upstart comes out of nowhere. He is promoting superstition. There is then his at least disaffection with his fiance, which there's not a whole lot of choice in this for both of them necessarily. And then something happens. He's a little unclear about this for reasons that they explained at the beginning of the movie. And then all of a sudden, he's being accused of killing her, which he doesn't remember doing. And he's like, I was over. He does try to exonerate himself, or not exonerate, but remove himself from blame by staging something. But it's like, oh my gosh, it's just they just really they set him up and had him kill himself.
Yeah, that's pretty messed up.
Yeah, exactly. And here's the question: why does any of this need to happen after Sophie shows up dead? She has been pronounced dead. Everyone thinks she's dead. And I'm getting ahead of myself here, because you get to the end, you find out, surprise, surprise, she's not. Why don't they just run off then? Why do they have to then kill Leopold, because that's really basically what the rest, the second half of the movie is about. It's about setting up Leopold so he unalives himself, and
Yeah, I haven't gone back and looked at it from his perspective. That's pretty messed up.
it is pretty messed up. And again, I'm not saying that Leopold was a good guy, because he did some shady things, but at the same time, he's not evil.
Yeah, he's not the monster the movie frames him as.
Yeah, it's certainly not the monster that caused me to say, "Oh yeah, finally they took out Leopold." I mean, if he had been like frothing at the mouth, if he'd been an agent of the Russian Empire or something like that, that'd be a little different.
I guess they just counted on the actor carrying the
and of course
bad guyness.
The thing is that Rufus Sewell's too good of an actor to do just the one-dimensional bad guyness.
Right.
He can do an actor. He can do a bad guy, but also make him somebody who can be relatable if given the right role.
Yeah, it just gives him too much depth.
Yeah, but of course, all for doing his job gets fired, which in some ways you could say maybe in retrospect he did kind of deserve it, given the fact that he ended up getting led by the nose by Eisenham.
Right.
But he has the locket. He is walking away with it. He bumps into the kid, and basically the kid executes a swap, steals the locket, but gives him the trick to the orange tree, which is one of those tricks that Ulk couldn't figure out.
Yeah, that's probably the most CGI looking shot that just lost me. That's
but of course, this is where you get the big explanation as to how it was all Eisenheim's plot, and he fooled everybody, and it's. Yeah, I was thinking though at that very end, and I can't help but wonder if this is deliberate. Norton as Eisenheim, he's in disguise. He looks an awful lot like Christian Bale.
Oh yeah, and we're in spoilers. So yeah, Christian Bale from The Prestige.
Yeah, Prestige. And
that's interesting. I hadn't connected that.
Yeah, just to me, I'm like, was that a deliberate thing, or is it just had that if you put that kind of makeup on Norton, he just ends up looking like Christian Bale? I don't know. So.
Oh, just Christian Bale in general. I thought you meant the character Fowler.
No, I didn't mean the character. Ooh, that is a spoiler.
Yeah, that is a spoiler. Well, I said spoilers.
He just looks like Christian Bale in general, and I'm like, oh, okay. I guess maybe that's kind of a wink and a nod to the fact that these movies were in production at the same time. They knew that they'd be competing against each other.
Yeah, I think it's probably just coincidence because I don't want to get too into it, but these movies really didn't know about each other. In fact, Prestige was going to be made 2 years earlier, but just because of Batman Begins, that ended up being held for a couple of years.
But he figures it out. He figures he's been played, but he's so well played, he doesn't care. He's kind of like, whatever, Yeah, it doesn't matter. I contributed to the heir to the throne, killing himself. So
yeah, he's kind of amused by the whole thing. It's funny the way they play it is they do it in flashbacks. If they show all these things they didn't show you earlier.
Yes,
and I'm going to get into this more. I'm going to save my rage for this later.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to that because I do want to.
They think it's very clever. It's not.
Yes. And that's the movie, and I'm like, okay, it's not the worst movie I've ever seen. It's not a terrible movie, but I was just like, this is the film that goes up against The Prestige. I've got to see The Prestige.
Yeah, and this is where we get into our review for The Prestige. Okay, after a tragic accident, 2 stage magicians in 1890s London engage in a battle to create the ultimate illusion while sacrificing everything they have to outwit each other. Okay, so the way this one opens, we start with this shot of all these hats. Mm-hmm. It's you don't know what it's about, but you'll know by the end. Mm-hmm. And he says, it's very quiet to the point where when I was watching it with my sister-in-law, because she hadn't seen it before, and she's like, is the sound on? I'm like, oh yeah, this starts silent. And then he's like, are you watching closely? And then we open with this trick put on by Michael Caine.
As John Cutter.
Yeah, John Cutter. He's giving this bird disappearing trick for this little girl that we don't know who she is yet, but he sets it up.
And he's explaining that magic consists of 3 things: the pledge,
the turn,
and
the prestige.
Yes. And it's such a good explanation, and I just love how it's the same. Nolan starts with the disjointed timeline.
Yeah,
and it is definitely one where it can be very confusing when you start with, but it doesn't seem to be jarringly so.
No, it's not, and I'll get into why that is in our Criss Cross section. But yeah, he starts with the nonlinear story. He basically starts just at the end of the second act.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great. So he starts with the real transported man. The electric machine is going off, and that's the biggest mystique thing of this. Of you're like, what is that about? And Borden is sneaking onto the stage, and you have no idea what his deal is at this point. But
you just know he's Christian Bale.
Yeah, he's Christian Bale. He's got a beard.
Yeah, and he's basically bullying his way down there. He's like, I'm part of the act. He tells the dumb stagehand.
Yeah. And then, he goes back and he sees as the magic trick happens and he disappears. And
the great Danton.
Yeah, great Danton, Hugh Jackman's character.
Yeah.
He disappears up top stage. He drops down into a
Chinese water trap.
Yeah, Chinese water trap, and he drowns.
Yes. And and Bale is watching this, and he just has no idea what's going on. And I'm going to get to one of the things I absolutely love about this part of the movie. But he's like, it's not your standard Chinese water trap, because Chinese water traps have a lock on them with an opportunity for like a key or something, and he notes right away. He's like, where's the key? There's no place to do that, and so he tries to save Angier, Hugh Jackman's character, but he fails, and then he's on trial. And he's on trial for the murder. And there's something, I have a question about this that I will get to in a bit. And so you have, this we've seen the moment of Jackman's death, and we've seen the Bale's on trial for it. And you start getting the explanation. Cutter's on the stand. He's kind of basically explaining what's happened, but it is very unclear. And just when you really start begging for explanation, you have the beginning of the flashbacks. Now, I had to go back.
Yeah, but before we get into the flashbacks, though, in that courtroom scene, you see Borden wave at this little girl, and it's like, oh, okay, it's his daughter. And
it's the same little girl from the very beginning.
She plays a very small but important role in this movie.
So you get to the framework of the flashback is that while Borden is in jail, he is approached by the solicitor who is working for this Lord
Caldwell.
Yeah. And he's basically says, we want to buy your tricks, in return for which, obviously, money's not going to do you any good where you're probably going.
Right.
But we'll go ahead and
to heck.
but we'll save you from we'll save your daughter from the poorhouse.
Yeah.
And this sets up the flashback structure. Now I had to go back and rewatch it because I wanted to keep track. I wanted to kind of track it. There are 3 separate timelines playing out in the movie.
Oh, okay.
And the mechanism for going between the timelines
is the journals.
Are the journals.
Yeah.
And it was, I didn't pick up on how the journals were being used till the second time.
I didn't pick up on 3. I saw 2. What is the third one?
The third one, the first one is where you start with Angier's trip to Colorado.
Right.
The second one is where you have Borden and Angier working as shills.
Okay, yeah.
And then the third one
beginning.
is something that they have to do separately because it's Borden himself, and you see him meeting Sarah, and then we're introduced to Bernard Fallon, and but it's separate from the 2 that are playing out. The third one is the one that, let me go over my notes here, is the one you only see at the beginning, but it is a little distinct from the first 2.
Okay.
So now I'm
I think one is a continuation of the other.
Okay.
But I think it's the journals looking back in the like end of the second act, journals looking back on the rest of the movie, and the rest of it is going to catch up with the journals, and then we get to a certain point and those meet up.
See, I saw it when I saw it the second time. I thought it as more as the third one was Borden reading the journals, thinking kind of it triggering the memories in him, and so it's journal triggered, but it's not basically following what's being outlined.
Oh, the other linear storyline.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you have the 2 linear storylines, and then but in that Nolan's doing that, I think, so as to give Borden backstory, which is the very important backstory for what happens later in there. But I'm going to let you carry.
Yeah. So the transported man is the main trick of the movie, and they introduce it to you the first time he does it. I guess.
We have no idea what it is.
Oh, yeah. This is just mentioned right here when he's talking to Lord Caldwell. It's like, okay, what's the transported man? And then we do have that flashback to Colorado, and so it's almost in backwards order. Colorado basically happens in the middle of the timeline if you were to put it out linearly. And I have done this. I edited the movie in linear order. It's boring as crap. So just watch it normally.
It shows you how when you do a disjointed timeline right, it really spices
he knows what
up
he's
the joint.
doing,
Yeah.
and I'll get into why that is in the Criss Cross.
So you have and of course, and the device is so wonderful. It is when Borden is reading Angier's journal, and Angier in his journal is writing about reading Borden's journal.
Right.
And that is how we get to that second timeline, which is Borden and Angier when they're working as shills for Milton the Magician. And that's Ricky Jay.
And this is the very beginning.
Yes.
Linearly.
And here I just love how he sets up these characters, because we see how they both are alike in the sense that they both absolutely love magic. They're committing their lives to it.
Definitely.
But we also see how different they are in terms of their command of it and their approach to it.
Right. And there's a quote from Borden that he says, "A real magician tries to invent something nobody's ever seen." That's how you can tell the difference between him. He's more, I guess you'd define him as a Nolan, and I don't know.
I see him as the natural magician.
Yeah, he's a natural magician, and he's like the cutting edge type. I don't want to get it too into these people or like Elon Musk or whatever. I don't mean there's a lot of stuff about him, but just that cutting edge type person that everybody acknowledges, like they're on the edge. And Angier is more just, he's a showman.
Yes.
Is the greatest showman.
Yes. And that really there's actually a point at which where Borden becomes a better showman.
That's true.
And I initially kind of had a question about that, but then I figured out why, and we'll get to that. But what you have is where I thought they best developed that point is when Cutter gives them the challenge that there's the goldfish trick that this other this Chinese magician is doing somewhere else, and he challenged them to figure it out. And they go to the performance. They're sitting next to each other and they're watching it, and this is where it's. I mean, Bale and Jackman are so good. I mean,
they're so great.
I can't think of a bad performance in this movie. I mean, the closest is that Scarlett Johansson has kind of a dodgy accent.
Oh yeah.
But you have so Borden and Angier are sitting there watching performance, and you could see with no words are being said, Borden gets the trick instantly.
Yeah, you see it in his eyes.
And Angier's like he's trying to
just
puzzle
confused.
it out. Yeah, he's trying to figure out how is this working, and he does figure it out. But he has to slog through it, and he shows it to his wife, Julia, who's.
Hold on to that for a second. This is one of my favorite scenes where he's like watching the Chinese magician go into his cab, and he's like, "Oh, just like you can tell he knows what's going on, and he's still confused." His Angier is still confused, and he's just looking at him, and he's like, "No, this is the trick." And he's like, he's okay. What does he say? He's like, "This is the act," and it's foreshadowing for what's going to happen with him. He's like, the whole thing that he's doing where he's pretending to be a crippled Chinese man is, I guess he is Chinese, but the cripple is the act. Like all the offstage thing is the act so that he can do his trick. And then he's like, that's the only way. And he puts his fist on the bricks to get rid of or get past all of this. I just love that. And I think it speaks to me as a filmmaker of just, you're almost conjuring things out of nothing. And it's just, I don't know. I love that scene.
And I think that gets to the fascination that you see in both of these, which is, I mean, there's this interesting affinity you see in films, I think, between filmmakers and magicians.
Right.
How filmmakers really seem to have a particular fondness for the magicians' art because
that's kind of what you're doing.
Exactly. But they do it without the CGI. They do it without the post-production effects. They have to do it in the moment. And it really is, and that's where, and like the filmmakers in The Illusionist, I think they try to do as many practical magical effects as possible for the film.
Right.
we also get introduced, of course, to Julia,
Mm-hmm.
and Julia becomes so pivotal to Andrew's motivations because and this gets to the act that she performs with
Right.
with
Mm-hmm.
Milton, and you have Borden and Angie as the shills, and so they're part of the act, but they're not the actual magician, nor are they the ones risking their life with the Chinese water tanks
Right.
act.
Yeah. So Julia, they do the Chinese water escape thing with her, and it's set up earlier that Borden he uses a different knot that he's like, it's fine, he can slip it, or she can slip it, and she can't slip it. It's made very vague, like what knot he used, and she drowns in the water tank.
Now, the one question I didn't have, the one question I have I couldn't quite get an answer to before we did this is I got the impression he was proposing the knot to push the envelope, maybe, or was it just that
I think
was
he's
the
just
knot
showing
he-
off.
Yeah, and this I didn't pick this up the first time, but I saw it the second time. Is that he does get Julie's permission?
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, and so it's not as though Borden is deliberately
Risking her life.
yes in his mind he's that and you see that before the goldfish scene.
Mm-hmm.
Where Cutter issues the challenge. That's after that Borden and Angie and Julia are having the argument about using the knot. And Angie, who is deeply, deeply, deeply in love with Julia, and they're married, he's like, he doesn't want to risk her life.
Right.
And she is, I'm willing to do it. She's, she appreciates that pushing the envelope, and she's willing to try it. But of course, it ends so tragically.
Right.
And this is the point at which these two men with the similar passions just diverge.
Yeah, the big diversion, and he asks him at her funeral, which knot did you tie, Borden? And he's like, I can't remember what he said, but he's like, I don't know.
He says, I think he said something like, I honestly don't remember.
Yeah,
And
it becomes very clear why that is
yes,
later on.
It's one. And this goes back to why. And this is one of the things that I know we're kind of jumping ahead a bit, but I find Prestige is such a rewatchable movie in a way that I did not feel I ever needed to do with The Illusionist.
Right.
There was nothing to figure out. But what you're getting is it's Nolan as the magician himself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He uses I'll get into this, but I guess right here's fine. The Pledge, the Turn, and the Prestige is Act 1, Act 2, Act 3.
Mm-hmm.
The Turn, there's actually a line that says here at the turn, and we'll get to that later, and that's actually the end of Act 2. It's very clever what he does.
But we also start to see, now we get the focus a bit more upon Borden. And we get this, how Borden is trying to establish his own name as a magician. Apparently Milton's whole act is broken up, that Julia's dead, Angie and Borden go their separate ways. You start to see Borden doing it. And you get the sense of him, how his showmanship doesn't measure up to his magical ability.
Right.
He had that great, like he does the bullet trick.
Right.
And what I loved about that scene was how he's doing his tricks, and the audience is not wrapped by them. They're there to see one trick, and he has never he doesn't know how to engage them short of the one trick that they're there to see.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so you're seeing both his ability, which is the trick that everyone likes to see, but the fact that that's all he has to offer. He has nothing around it to really kind of make himself. He's thriving solely upon the tricks.
Yeah.
And we're in Angier, who knows this trick, uses it because he's so bitter. He blames Borden for his wife, so he never gets over that.
Yeah.
You never see him saying. And I think of the scene later on where he's being told by Olivia, you have this act, and he's like, that's not good enough.
Yeah. And this gets into the escalation of their feud. Like, he accidentally killed his wife, but he completely blames him for it. Mm-hmm. And then he puts the bullet in the gun, and you see who it is right before. Yeah.
Borden figures it out right before.
And then he shoots at him, and he dodges just enough for his fingers to get blown off, his two smallest fingers.
Yeah. And when Borden is being when they had that confrontation in the act, you see Fallon who is Borden's assistant. I think he's supposed to be
Right.
like his engineer.
Yeah, his own engineer.
Yeah. And he's kind of like at the last moment waking up to what's about to happen.
Right.
And but he can't intervene in time, so Borden loses his fingers, and it seems disruptive of his act.
Right.
And you have his wife Sarah basically saying, what are you going to do? And he talks about it, and that's where you start to see this question about how she talks about sometimes he seems to love the magic more than her.
Right.
And it's
That's probably the strongest through line and the biggest foreshadowing. Yeah.
And I must confess, it's so subtly done. I did not pick up on it the first time. There are other clues I picked up on more than that one.
Nolan's amazing at that.
Yeah. So then Cutter reaches out to Angier, and he agrees to work with him. So they're going to work on a trick.
Right.
And it's the bird cage trick. And this is also where you have the introduction of Olivia, Scarlett Johansson's character, who is going to play a role in it as well. There's this thing there that about getting their hands dirty that starts to become more prevalent in the movie, which is kind of which I think kind of gets to the irony of the injury that Borden has. I mean, you can't literally get your hand any dirtier than to have your own blood splattered on it, missing fingers.
Yeah.
But they have this trick, and I must confess, I'm still not entirely clear about the mechanics of it. But then Borden does the thing. I think this becomes big later on.
The bird disappearing.
Yes.
Thing, the advanced one. Yeah.
And how does Borden get his revenge for losing his fingers?
Messes up that. I just don't think he messes up Angier's fingers, but it does mess up this lady's fingers.
I thought it messed up Borden's fingers. I thought he basically staged it to make it look like because here's the question I had. They're having this rivalry.
Yeah.
During the rivalry, they seem to be very determined not to injure anybody other than each other. And if that's true,
that lady does get injured. Her
okay, I missed it because I remember the screaming and but okay, so then in that case,
they don't show it because it's not an R-rated movie. But yeah.
So then what we're seeing then is we're seeing how you're starting to have collateral damage.
Right.
And not only and I guess it makes sense because not only does the lady get injured, but the theater manager, he basically loses the business and he has to. I love this. I have to take on a comedian. You know how much I hate comedians.
Yeah, that's funny. Right after Angier shoots him with this gun and knocks off his fingers, there's this line that's great foreshadowing from his wife. She's like, "I don't understand how it can be bleeding again the next day," and that's. We're in spoilers, so that's allusion to.
I missed that.
It's
altogether.
the other guy.
Yeah,
and it's a fresh wound because they just that shot where it goes from one brother to the other, and they use the mallet to take off his fingers.
And that's something that I find myself doing on the rewatch, which is trying to figure out which brother is in which scene. And they explain some of it at the very end, but some of it you have to go back and puzzle out for yourself.
I think they do allude to which one it is for each scene, but I haven't broken it down scene by scene. But yeah,
I haven't, but I did so as I went along.
Right.
But then you get transported to the Colorado timeline.
Right.
And you see why Angier is there. He's there to meet Nikola Tesla.
Yeah.
And he and this is a point at which you don't know why he's there, but you do know he's there because Borden has developed in the interim some act that supposedly Tesla gave to him and Angier wants for himself. And again, this is where you see the limit of Angier as a magician. He has been driving himself batty trying to figure it out. He can't, so he is going to simply go to the person, the engineer who
engineer. Engineer is the magical maker, but he's an actual engineer that makes machines. Yeah,
but he's an engineer who's employed as an engineer. So,
yeah, true.
In the one case, and so he basically is just going to have Tesla reinvented for him. And so what's interesting is that so you've actually seen the act kind of in the beginning, and yet you still have no idea what it is.
Yeah,
and it's there, and it's driving Angier to do this thing where he is in Colorado, which is clearly outside his comfort zone.
Yeah,
and he's just so obsessed.
Yeah, he's going to the ends of the earth. To,
And he doesn't feel the pride that Borden does in the magic to the point where it has to be his trick.
Yeah.
So
he just wants to win. Yeah. There's that great scene in there where his assistant, which is just Oh, Andy Serkis in this role, and any role that he plays where he's not behind CGI, like he's great at that. But you see him, you can see how great an actor he is. It may be unrecognized role, but it's great, and kind of the purpose of him being there. So Tesla has this mystique before you get to him, and then you'll see who plays him. But he gives him this light bulb, and it glows without being just in his hand. And he's like, "What?" And then all these light bulbs light up, and this big wide shot of all of them unconnected in the snow. And it's just this mystique about and this is a real thing of Tesla learned how to do wireless energy. It's not, if you get into the mechanics of it, it wastes a lot in the air, but it's pretty cool that you can transfer electricity through the air.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about the use of Tesla is that, and I think this gets to Tesla's cultural presence in our historical imagination today, which is that in a way that, I mean, we esteem so many people from that era for their inventions, people like Edison.
Yeah.
You know, and then great businessmen like Carnegie and Rockefeller and so forth. Tesla seems so mysterious in a way.
Yeah.
That the others aren't, and so we can sit here and you know, come up with this idea that Tesla can, you know, maybe make a device that turned lead into gold.
Right.
And it just okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
that's
I get it. Yeah. He's kind of got this underdog quality to him. Like back in the day, Edison was the guy, and nowadays it's like, oh, Tesla, he's the man. Like even to the point where the cars are called Tesla.
Yeah. They're not called Westinghouse. That's for
no.
Sure. But it actually gets to something that one of my favorite points about the movie just made me laugh. But we'll get to that in a minute.
I want to at some point compare this movie to the current war, which is about Westinghouse, and I actually think it might be Edison. It might not even have Tesla in there.
No,
but
Tesla.
I haven't seen it.
Tesla was working for Westinghouse. Westinghouse was was just a businessman, but he employed Tesla and adopted the alternating current. And that's where I have an issue with the timeline a little bit, because by that time, Westinghouse was pursuing alternating current.
Okay.
But then I didn't worry about it because that wasn't the focus of the movie.
Yeah.
But you have that whole sense of, and what's interesting is that Mr. Alley plays the same role for Tesla that Julia does for Mike the Magician, and that Olivia does for Angier, and then Borden. And they talk about the role that the assistant plays, which is, as Cutter points out, you know, you have these beautiful assistants because they're a distraction.
Right.
So that way you don't see the magic happening. And you have you have Mr. Alley. And, you know,
so beautiful.
Yeah. No dissing on Andy Serkis.
Yeah.
He's a wonderful guy.
He's just no.
But he doesn't have to. He doesn't have to wear fishnets and a corset. and
is it weird that I pay money for that movie?
Well,
he could pull it off.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure he could pull off. He's that good. But again, it's a testament to me of the caliber of the talent in this movie, that you could have Andy Serkis in was, you know, a role that, you know, no shade on Andy Serkis, you know, a dozen different actors could have done. They would have brought different things to it, but at the end, they're not quite as...
Yeah, he knows his role in there, and he does it really good. And he rides it right down the line, and he makes this mystique for Tesla, and you just want to see him, and then... Yeah.
And you also have that love that he has for Angier, and you have when you have the later flashback where Angier first, you know, learns of Tesla and goes to see the performance, he's actually there at the demonstration, and you also have Simon Pegg in there for a brief moment too.
Oh, where's Simon Pegg?
When Angier is walking up to the top of the steps before he enters the hall to see the performance, Pegg is like in front of the poster, and he has this brief exchange with Angier.
Oh, okay.
So actually, that is the next scene is when he does that. Is he goes to the science expo. Cutter's basically telling him, you know, science is where, you know, you're going to get your next magic from. So go see Tesla, and he goes to this performance, which is, you know, shut down by Edison's people because it's, you know, alternating current, and that's the current that's going to kill you. And he sees Borden in the audience.
Right. And he's just staring up. He's like as close as he can be to this arcing thing, and it's like arcing right over his face, and he's just staring at it, and everybody else is freaking out. Great.
He's sitting there. It's one of the things that makes Bale. He does such a great job of showing Borden working things out without using a
Right.
single word.
Yeah.
But then Angie follows Borden, and he sees that Borden has what he lost. He has Sarah,
family.
he has the daughter Jess,
Mhm.
and he makes that. And again, another foreshadowing. He talks about how it especially puzzles Angie because he sees how he seems to be craving that life, but he also rails against it.
Right.
And it's this idea that Borden just seems to be practically schizophrenic sometimes.
And he kind of is.
Yeah.
And then in that scene, his wife is like, no, he says to his wife, "I love you," and she's like, "See, today you mean it." And it's
that's called back to another scene that we didn't cover, which is
Yeah.
when he's having a conversation with her, and it's with the bullet trick, and he says, "Well, I love you," and she says that I don't see it in your eyes, but that's okay because when I do see it, that's how I know you mean it.
yeah.
And
when
so
it's there.
she kind of is picking up on the fact there's something, and this again I think gets to the writing is that they play that out over the course of the movie, in the fact that as we see her, she constantly is reflecting back upon that. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. So he finally gets to meet Tesla, and oh my gosh, this is such a great introduction.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah, and again, it's this, and I think it's something that Anjay would especially appreciate because he gets showmanship, which is when he finally gets into Tesla's laboratory, and you have the arcing electricity, and then Tesla just strides through it like it's a water, it's a water
nothing.
feature. So,
Yeah, it's so great.
and who's playing Tesla?
David Bowie.
Oh
and
my gosh.
when I first watched this movie, I had no idea who David Bowie is, but now it's like, wow, that's pretty amazing they got him.
Oh yeah, and the thing is, he's playing Tesla. I mean, Bowie is so much older than Tesla was at that time, and yet you wouldn't know it because he looked so darn good.
Yeah.
And yeah, apparently, this is the person that Nolan had. He could not imagine anybody else doing it. He actually flew to New York and sold Bowie on performing the performance. And I imagine he could have gotten someone else, but I mean, and the thing is, it's not a showy performance.
No, it's not at all. It's very pulled back.
Yeah, but Bowie just is able to pull off this mysterious charisma.
Yeah.
With so little.
Yeah.
And it makes me appreciate why it was
While doing an accent.
Yes, while doing an accent. A better one than Scarlett Johansson, which
Right.
I know I'm passionate about Scarlett Johansson's accent,
Yeah.
but it was such a discordant part of the movie for me. But you have Tesla as the scientific magician, and he says he's going to, I just love that line about how Anjay convinces him to build the machine, and he's like, "When are you going to start?" "Oh, I've already started." It's kind of like he's working it out in his head. He's going to puzzle it. It's like the next level above Borden. Borden it works out the acts, and he kind of tests them out, and Tesla's already kind of gaming out in his head how he's going to do this thing. And we finally figured out what the thing is. It is, and this is where you go back to the earlier flashback, which is you see the transported man for the first time, played out by Borden. And I love how he's just so gobsmacked. He is just sitting there, he's talking to Olivia, and she's looking at him because she just can't read his face. "What did you just see?" And he said, "It's the greatest trick I've ever seen."
And I love that they don't show it at this point. It makes some mystique for it. But usually I wouldn't go that way, but it's great.
Oh yeah, but it's so brilliantly done, and exactly for that reason, because it's like, what is this? And he has his argument with Cutter about it. And what's so amazing, and again, this is something I didn't pick up till the second time I watched it, Cutter actually explains the trick.
Yeah, throughout this whole movie, he explains how he does.
Yeah, and it goes back to
he has to use as a double. So
and this goes back to one of the recurring themes in the movie, which is that magic seems so simple when you know how it's done.
Yeah,
and that came out. Sarah says that when Borden shows her the bullet trick. Is that now it's so simple. It's always how it's done. But Cutter's explaining how it's done. The only way it can be done. But Angie just cannot accept that.
Yeah.
And
there's also the line from Borden where he's showing the trick to the nephew of his future wife, and he's like, "The secret doesn't get you anything. It's the trick you use it for that will impress people."
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
And seems and Angie gets that in a way that Borden does not always seem to, but Angie can't figure out the trick.
Right.
And he just becomes obsessed by this. And then you have I love this whole thing about how he duplicates the trick the best that he can without knowing it.
Yeah.
And then that's where you get...
the new transported man. And the way they do it is great. And I love how they show step by step, this is exactly how the trick works. Mm-hmm. This is where, we'll get into this in Criss Cross. But they show you everything, as opposed to Illusionist, where it seems like actual magic, and it's like, okay, I don't buy that.
But the way they do it is they have to do it the only way they can think of, which is they get a double.
Right.
And he's played by Hugh Jackman.
He does a great job.
Yeah, he does a great job.
Yeah.
He's
playing his drunk self.
Yeah, his drunk self. This drunken actor who Olivia turns up, and this is where you're starting to see how Olivia's falling for Angier.
Yeah.
But she ultimately, it runs headlong into this obsession because they do the new transported man, and it's a huge success.
Yeah,
and he does it so much better than Borden does, and he has these dramatic flares to it. The thing with the hat was just so awesome.
Yeah,
and yet he's not satisfied.
No. Yeah.
And part of it is, and supposedly it's about how he's not getting the kudos, but really I think it's because he doesn't know if he's actually doing it better than Borden.
Right, and there's the line from Borden where he's like, does he enjoy taking his bows onto the stage? And Angier, he's like, I need to know how he does it. And he's like, go work for him. And it's kind of a betrayal for her.
Yeah. And
she kind of starts to switch camps at this point.
Well, she doesn't even start. I mean, she basically just goes and blatantly does. I mean, you of course you don't realize that at first, but and it's because I think it was that moment where he sends her there that she realizes she will never be greater in his heart than his obsession.
Right.
And I mean, you could argue Julie as well, but then those two are probably intertwined.
And I don't know if this line happens here or later, but this shows how much his obsession is taken over. Mm-hmm. He's like, what about your wife? And he's like, I don't care about my wife. I care about his trick.
Yeah, that happens a little bit later.
Yeah,
you're right. And then that's the point at which he really has totally lost it. And
right.
But you have so she goes to Borden. She tells Borden how he's doing the trick. And what does Borden do? What he's been doing every time that Angier tries to steal a march on him. He sabotages the trick.
Yeah.
And this is the point at which Borden shows something he's never shown before, which is showmanship.
Yeah.
And it is so...
Well, she kind of starts to... She's like, I can give you what you don't have, the showmanship, and I can teach you how to beat him. Mm-hmm. So she completely switches camps.
Yeah. And finally, Borden becomes the magician that he becomes more of a complete magician. And you see it with how he sabotages the trick and how it just breaks Angier.
Oh yeah, the sabotage of the trick is so great, the way they do it. And it's completely her too. Like you can tell she's the one that came up with that.
Yeah. They've
got the two doorways of he goes in one doorway and then
he comes out the other.
There's the original trick where he goes in the one doorway and comes out the other, and it's him, but of course it's the double, and he catches the hat and he bows and curtains close. And then the second way they do it is, Borden actually tries to turn his assistant against him, and so he goes in. He doesn't come out for a while, and he's like, go up.
Yeah.
And then he goes up, and he comes out all schmarmy, and he's like, oh, grabs the hat. I forgot I'm acting it out. You can't see it. Anyway, he's all schmarmy about it, and he's like, oh no, hands up, grabs the hat, and then they close the curtain real quick so he doesn't mess it up anymore. The third way they do the trick is when Borden actually takes over from the double. He goes in the doorway, Borden comes out the other side, and then as the button on the trick, the double is lowered from the ceiling, and it's like, oh, there's too much magic on my theater across the street.
Yeah, so he not only does he sabotage Anjay's trick, he uses it as an ad for his own performance,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is just so genius.
It's definitely her idea.
Yeah,
but-
and that's that I had missed that the first time, but the second time it's like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Is that Olivia really has? It shows you what Anjay just kind of was missing, and that Borden begins to appreciate, and that of course creates its own set of problems. So,
yeah.
but then we and you see that with the fact that Olivia is getting very familiar with Borden, and Sarah sees this.
Yeah.
And now she has to deal with the fact that maybe her husband is falling for his assistant, and he is, but
Yeah.
just not in the way you think.
Not the one, or not the side of him that she's assuming.
There's a great line in there too. That's another example of foreshadowing. I can't remember who it's applied to, but it really is applicable to both of them. He lives his act,
Yeah.
and
Same thing as the Chinese magician.
exactly. So they've kind of become that act. But then you get to you go to Colorado,
Yeah.
and that this is when Edison's thugs show up, and this is where you start getting Edison. He's like this offstage mob boss.
Yeah.
Yeah, because these guys are showing up, and you're not going to show up at Tesla's lab and go, "Hey, it's a nice lab you got. You know, be a shame if anything bad happened to it."
Right. I think Nolan skipped that scene for a reason.
Yes, he did. Oh, well, you
Yeah, you see
it,
that
yeah, but you don't
picture,
hear
yeah.
it. So
Yeah, so that scene, he goes in and you're expecting to see this amazing trick. He puts his hat on the floor. He turns on the machine. It starts to arc all over the place. And the hat does nothing. It's like,
but he also at this point figures out he discovers the extent of Olivia's betrayal, which is the whole journal was a misdirection. That Borden sent Anjay chasing off to Tesla. He never got his transported man act from Tesla in the first place. It was all a big misdirection that basically sends Anjay halfway across the world for no good purpose. And it's genius the way it plays out, because they reference it again later on.
yeah. And the line for it is Borden in the journal is like, I hope you find solace for your thwarted ambition back in your American home. And it's one of those Nolan-y moments, or the mind blown moments that, like, yeah, this whole thing has been a ruse. And I love that they read each other's journals in the other person's voice.
Yes.
So,
But it's just so fascinating to see how it also gets to Borden's arrogance. He does not think that Nikola Tesla is going to come up with anything, that sending Anjay to Colorado is a bad idea.
right.
Even though
He doesn't buy the hype, even though it looked like he was fascinated at
Yeah.
the exposition.
yeah. And this gets to the question of, how long has Borden been setting him up? Did he know that Anjay was there, and he's like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and go to this exhibition of Tesla so as to sow the seed of that misdirect,
Yeah.
or was it just that he saw them there and was like, hey, maybe I can use this? That it's one of the details you don't need explained, but it's there.
Well, the part that is explained in there is what he actually used for the trick. In the original Transported Man, he's got like Tesla coils up on top of his boxes, so they don't really do anything. It's just dressing up the act.
Yes, which gets more dressed up once Olivia becomes part of it,
Right.
because they actually start using electricity and everything with it. But then you have, Anjay is getting frustrated at Tesla, and I don't blame him, because he's been throwing an unspecified but not inconsiderable sum of money at Tesla, and all Tesla can do is shoot electricity at the hat.
Right.
Tesla and Ally are like, we're going to try with a cat. They do it with a cat, and I'd say it's a pretty tame cat.
Yeah, it is.
Because
The acting of that cat for its reaction to the thing. I guess you can't call it acting from a cat, but it's just being. Well, I guess that's a good way to act. But it just the reaction to the Tesla coil after it goes off. It's like, okay.
and it seems like it's failed yet again. And Anjay is leaving the lab, and he goes outside.
Oh yeah,
and
this is so great.
the cat races past him. He hears the cat fighting with another cat, and it's the same cat, and they're fighting amidst a field of top hats.
Yeah, multiple hats and multiple cats.
Yeah.
It's so cool. For some reason, just that multiple thing is just the coolest thing to me. Like all that shot of all those hats at the beginning, you can tell there's something weird about it.
Yeah.
And it may have to do with my weirdest fear, maybe not my biggest fear, is like walking into the room and seeing myself sitting there.
Yeah.
It's like, that'd just be so weird.
Yeah. And that's what Tesla has done, is that
Right.
he has, because you're thinking Tesla's going to develop some sort of teleporter.
Uh-huh.
And Tesla is almost like, it's like something out of Rick and Morty, which is like, oh, that's, don't be stupid. That's not how it's done. And then you come up with some sort of equally, weird science way. And what he's done is he's found a way. It's not the transported man, it's the duplicate man.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't what he was trying to do, but it's, I don't know if better is the word, but it's certainly cooler.
It is so much worse.
Yes.
It is so much worse.
There's so many more. That's probably the biggest moral
Yeah.
weirdness going on in this movie.
And there's this emotional element that we'll get to in a bit, I think. But it shows you just how far Angie is down this rabbit hole at this point, that he figures all this stuff out, and he's thinking to himself, I can make this work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And meanwhile, and yet there's this question as to whether or not Angie is working too hard, because back in England, Borden is doing a fantastic job of destroying his own life. You see Sarah is now drinking daily.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She is no longer, she can't cope anymore with the partial alienation. Borden is beginning to appreciate just how, badly he's erred, but it's just too late. And of course he's also got his side thing with Olivia, and that seems to be maybe, kind of getting out of hand. It's certainly contributing to the issue with Sarah. It's like he has made such a mess of things. And,
This is my biggest gripe with this movie, and we'll get into it. Well, I guess I'll get into it now. So the argument that he has with his wife, this is the scene that I know for sure this is the other Borden.
Yeah.
It's like, he's out there in the hall, like comforting his daughter as Fallon. And it's like, why aren't you in there having this conversation? Why are you letting this? Yeah. And especially since she knows, she's figured it out. He's like, I know what you are. I know what.
Well, she says she is. The question is, I don't know if it's never made clear that she's actually figured out what's going on.
Oh, she has. That's, I guarantee you.
Okay. Like, so yeah, exactly. So unless, of course, the only difference being that maybe, of course, you can't even say that Fallon doesn't know, because, I mean, you can hear the screaming.
Yeah.
But it seems like he's made a strategic choice to save the daughter. Because when they're having the argument, he's pulling her away. And again, it's...
I see. I've never seen it that way. My thing was like, your wife's right there, and you could be fixing this thing.
Yeah, he could.
You could save her, and he may not know which direction this is going, but it's like, I don't know.
But it's almost like he's so committed to the act, he can't afford to break it.
Yeah, that's my biggest issue with it. He chooses magic over family. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the movie, I'll tell you what the message is that I think that they're trying to sell, and I don't buy it. We'll get there.
But nonetheless, Angie comes back, and but before then you get to the present, where Borden realizes that the journal he's been reading that the solicitor gave him, Angie basically has done a turn for him, the same turn that Borden did for Angie with the journal earlier, with Borden's supposed journal earlier.
Yeah, and this is the line here at the turn. I must leave you, Borden, in your cell, awaiting your death for my murder. And it's just such a he ramps up he does the double journal mind blowing moments. It's just so great.
And that also gets to the big question that I had, which was, to what extent did Angier return to England planning to set Borden up like that? Because I think there's one thing he could predict, which was that at some point Borden was going to try to sabotage the trick.
I feel like I just had this thought right now, but I think right as from the get-go, going back to England, he knew what he was going to do to Borden.
And it is... I mean, you're still not aware of the extent of what he is doing, but you see Angier planning out the new act. He reaches out to Cutter, but he won't tell Cutter exactly what's involved. Mm-hmm. He wants Cutter running the front. He doesn't want Cutter understage. He has some people to run things for him. And it kind of shows how Angie's aware just how abhorrent what he's doing is.
Yeah.
But he doesn't care anymore. But you have this huge success. And what I love most about Angier's success is that Borden, for the first time, experiences what it's like to be Angier. Because he watches that trick. He has no idea how it's done.
Yeah.
He cannot figure it out.
This part I love. This is the down point for Borden, which
Yeah.
who's basically the main character.
Mm-hmm.
I just love how, and I can't tell which Borden that is. That's so. Okay.
I think I can. I think.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let me tell what the scene is. The real transported man. That's the last one with the machine.
Mm-hmm.
He sees that trick, and he's so gobsmacked by it, and he's confused, and he doesn't know how it's done for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying to Fowler off screen, and you see all these shots from this point in the movie where it's Fowler off screen, and he's talking to him, and it's hinting at who Fowler might be. He's like, why can't you figure out his trick? We've done this. Or like, why can't you beat him? And I can't figure out if it's Borden or if it's Fowler, or like if it's the magic-loving Borden or if it's the more family-loving Borden.
I think it's the family-loving Borden.
Yeah, I came to that conclusion after talking to my sister-in-law too.
Because at some point, Borden says, I'm giving up.
Right.
And then you see Borden going to the act and trying to force his way down the night that he's arrested for Angier's murder.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, and it's kind of funny, it's kind of great in a way, because that's the moment at which, just in the same way that the water trap closes on Angier and locks him in, Borden is locked in, trapped with Angier's murder. Because it's this fascinating question. They cannot explain exactly how Borden set it up. And you see that at the very beginning of the court scene when Cutter's explaining it on the stand, and the barrister says, "Well, how do you get the water tank down there?" And he says, he's a magician, ask him.
Right.
But it's like, who else could have done it?
Yeah.
And especially when you have this huge history of their rivalry,
and he's right there staring at him. Huge motive.
Yeah, and he's sitting there. He's next to the tank. He's crawling on the tank, and there's literally two witnesses there to watch it.
Yeah.
So it's like you can't say how Borden set that up, but he is the most likely suspect. And we're not exactly talking about CSI, 1889 London. So we're just going to go ahead and say that enough circumstantial evidence is there, and we're going to decide that Borden's guilty. And though that trap is locked, and Borden can't get out of it. But of course, that's not where the victory takes place. No, the victory takes place when Borden agrees to sell his secrets to the mysterious Caldlow, and Caldlow shows up. And who is Caldlow? It's Hugh Jackman.
Dear, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And of course, and the thing, this goes back to what happened. They talk about the beginning of the movie, but it's easy to forget about it. Angier himself is opposed. This comes out in a conversation he has with Julia, was that he's been a member of the English aristocracy, but his family forced him to do magic with this assumed identity. So Caldlow's the real him, and he just uses that to basically set this up.
Oh, I didn't pick up on that. That's interesting.
So, and he's been living his act. And so he gets to sit there and have that moment where not only does he get to gloat over his victory over Borden, but he's got Jess there, Borden's daughter. And Borden is like, here, have my prestige. He's giving him all the prestiges for all of his tricks. And Caldlow just tears him up and throws him away. I mean, you could just, Jackman doesn't display the satisfaction. He radiates it.
Yeah.
You don't see in his face, but the way he just
so smug.
Yeah, just like, I've won. I have finally beaten you. And Borden is going to die. Bale's so good in this moment. He's screaming at the guards, "There's the guy I'm supposed to have murdered." Yeah.
This is a very Hitchcocky moment. This is not the wrong man type thing. If he's in jail and he's in this trap and he's yelling at the guards and you feel for him, and you know exactly what the situation is, but it's like, how can he possibly explain this to them?
And yet you can't. I didn't feel for him quite as much because there is an arrogance about Borden
Right.
that is off-putting. And you see that earlier in the movie. This is a scene we didn't talk about, where Borden is writing down his tricks to prepare to give them to the solicitor, and the guard is hassling him because the guards are, they're just sneering about this magician who they have in captivity, and he tricks the guard into wearing the chain.
Yeah.
And
It's
the
a great
guard,
scene.
and it essentially humiliates the guard in front of the entire prison.
That's probably the only scene of unexplained magic in this movie.
Yeah. And it's just, but it's like when Borden's trying to get these guards to help him, the guards are just like, basically, we're so tired of your nonsense. They just beat him up.
Yeah.
And that, again, it's just to that character, the satisfaction of that moment must have been so great. And that's really the high point for Angier. Because then Cutter, who's really curious who's trying desperately to destroy the machine. He doesn't understand the machine, just knows it's dangerous. He goes to Cudlow. He realizes it's Angier, and he realizes he's been played.
Yeah, that's a great scene. I love. Well, okay, let's backtrack for just a little bit. Right before this, we have catch back up with the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
We have the scene where Borden goes to the real transported man, and he goes backstage, and he's like, what is the line? I'm part of the bloody act, you fool.
Yeah.
And we hear that again, and it's like, oh, okay, I get where this is.
Yeah.
That's why that line is there. So that you're like, oh, we're back at the beginning. So you've caught up, and now it's all the thrust is into Act 3.
And Act 3 is it's a quick act in the movie.
Yeah, it is.
It wraps up so much so quickly because so much has been so expertly laid down.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You don't need to reference anything anymore. It's just
Yeah, all the setup is done, and you've
Yeah.
got just payoff.
And it starts with
yeah.
Angier's payoff, and then you get Borden's payoff.
Yeah, so this Michael Caine scene, or he sees who Lord Caldwell is, is like, she needs her father. You're letting him hang, and I helped you. And so that it's this father through line is gonna pay off.
Mm-hmm. He's angry about being played, and so he tries to get off a parting shot, and it's a more powerful parting shot than he realizes. He says that because it goes back to earlier in the movie where Cutter was talking about how a sailor was once drowning and how he said the experience was going home, and he said, actually he didn't say going home, he said it was like agony, and he said that earlier to comfort Angier about Julia's loss. But now it's like the only thing he has in his arsenal to get back at being used.
Yeah.
And he doesn't realize just how powerful that hits.
And then he touches one of the tanks as they're looking at all the tanks. And they haven't shown what's in them yet.
Yes.
But it's pretty strongly hinted at what those tanks are about.
But Angier is, he's kind of, he's in his, he's in this workspace that he has with all the tanks. He is gloating over his victory as Borden is being hung, and as Borden is being hung, Angier is shot. And there's a question of by who?
Yeah.
And who is it? It's Borden. And that's when everything is explained. And that's why I thought it was a little clunky, because Borden shoots Angier, or Lord Caldwell, and he's dying, but he's kind of propped up there. And even though he's bleeding out, he's just on his knees, kind of working it all out. It's the biggest issue I have.
Maybe it's his obsession keeping him alive.
That is true, because he instantly figures out how Transported Man was done. The Bordens are twins,
right?
And you see the depth of their commitment and how they kept up the act to the point where they physically maimed one of the brothers. Physically maimed himself. They have seen their wife has committed suicide. They've pushed away Olivia. I mean, they've literally their commitment. They're so committed to their act that is destroyed their lives.
Yeah,
and then you find out what's going on with Angier, with what the new Transported Man is, and the real Transported Man is, and it is what I found so fascinating about the idea that he's constantly duplicating himself is how he disposes of the bodies. Because what he does, and you see that at the very beginning, is he subjects them to the same death that...
that his wife died. Oh, my goodness. That's so dark.
And so he experiences Sarah's death. Count the number of boxes at the very end.
Yeah.
That is the number of times he's experienced
Well, maybe that's some
Julie's
kind
death.
of self-punishment type thing. I don't know.
Or maybe he's, maybe the fact that he's still very much in her heart. He's not quite. Maybe it's just kind of merged with the obsession.
Yeah. And then we get to the end. We call back to the first scene where Michael Caine is doing that trick.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing the trick again, and it's happening now. And there's the daughter watching it, and he gets to the end of the trick, and he's like, "But you won't be." I have to get this right because we have this at the end of our thing. He's like, "But you won't clap yet. It's not enough to make something disappear. You have to bring it back." And he walks into the shot. Sorry, I love this. The way they play it. It's just like this was an earwig in my mind for the longest time, and I forgot what movie it was from. Like, you have to bring it back. Mm-hmm. And they do the boom, the Hans Zimmer, but I think it's not even Hans Zimmer for this, but the Nolan score comes in, the horns, mm-hmm. and you just feel it. And I buy that so much, but I'll get into the complications of it in a moment, but I love that as a sentiment, and I think that speaks to Nolan as a filmmaker himself. Mm-hmm. He's a family man, but he's taken away by his obsessions.
Mm-hmm. But in some ways, but now that the obsessions are gone, it's like all he has left is Jess.
Right.
So you have to wonder, I mean, will that be enough? And that's why it's a good thing. When I first saw it, I thought the wrong Borden died.
Oh, okay.
And I
that would suck.
It would suck. But then I saw it the second time, and as I was piecing together the boards, I realized it was the
the setup that you probably missed for that was there's a scene where he's like, "Go live for both of us."
It's right before us. This last scene with Fallon,
right,
where he says that you have to live for both of us and everything.
Yeah, he's apologizing in the cell, and he's like, "Go live for both of us," to Fallon outside. They do such a great job of hiding they get so close to his face sometimes for Fallon, and you don't recognize that it's Christian Bale.
Yeah.
But
and of course they hint at it with earlier in the movie with Angier's duplicate. With the fact that that they're having to put on makeup to disguise him and everything, and how that's how duplicates have to hide themselves, that they have to do with makeup. So, and
one wins the magic war. Angier wins, but he dies, and there's this so great in such an empty way. Mm-hmm. That speech that he's like, it was the look in their eyes or something like that. It's like, it's just so empty. Like, yeah, and then they pay it off with they counter that with you have to bring it back, and then he comes back and he picks up his daughter. Yeah, it's so great. There's a real father through line in Nolan's movies, and I love that. Interstellar is the most obvious, but
I'm hoping we get to that one in a future podcast.
Yeah.
So, there's one thing I want to mention about this, which is the what I kept thinking about at the very end was the callback to the line about getting your hands dirty. Because it's like, and this gets to where you have to give the laurel to Angier, even though he dies at the end, is the fact that he proved that he was willing to get his hands dirtier because he is literally killing himself for his act.
Right.
He is.
Yeah, you can't get much more
exactly
dirty than that.
And when you think about what it does, because they never get into the mechanics of the duplication, and that's, I think, for the best.
They leave it intentionally ambiguous.
Yeah. But if you think about, because you see when he first performs it, when he first tests it out,
right,
and what happens there, and then you figure that from that point onward, every time Angier is in the middle and doing the act, that Angier goes away.
Yeah.
And it is.
Well, I read it the other way, but yeah.
It is the duplicate that survives.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, so you're right. So I feel like it's the original that dies, and then the duplicate goes on.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that Angier actually has died
tons of times.
But the original Angier, he's gone.
Right.
And the idea that he was perfectly willing to literally sacrifice his own life, so that a version of him can get this revenge
for the magic for this obsession and revenge for his wife. Although I think it may not be about his wife anymore. It may just be about this feud and the magic.
And maybe in
And he says nothing about his wife in the last speech. So
that is true. It is about the trick.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can never entirely dismiss. 'Cause at the very least, in the sense, the wife has become such. She was kind of like that initial spark,
right.
That kind of got this thing going, and that I think that those emotions are going to be there for him.
Yeah, I hate to end this on a sour note, but the way that payoff is just so great. You have to bring it back. But he chooses magic in the when he's Fowler outside that room, letting the other Borden that's in love with Olivia talk to his wife. Mm-hmm. It's like, I would go in there. Like, are you kidding me? Like, she hangs herself after that, and it's like, you could have fixed that. You try to sell this message of it's about family, but he chose magic at that point. Maybe he's choosing family. And my sister-in-law pointed it out this way of he actually overcomes his obsession by the end.
Yes.
Like, so he may have messed up in that moment, but by this point he realizes my daughter is the only thing that matters at this point.
And what it costs him is it costs him his brother.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, that's true. I didn't even consider that.
He convinced, because you think about, he speaks with Fallon before he's hung, but after he realizes it, he could have told Fallon, okay, Cold goes live, we can do something to where we can out him maybe and not live or something like that. But no, they choose something to where they get the daughter back.
Yeah.
Which he wouldn't have been able to do as long as Caldwell was still alive, because he had formerly, I think, adopted or, become her guardian or something like that. So,
and I guess I'm thinking, like, when the other Borden dies, when he's hung, the magic loving one, I'm assuming, he says abracadabra, right? So you can tell he's relishing in this. He is dying, but this is like the biggest magic trick he's pulling off. I think he's proud of this thing. But
yeah, can't help but wonder if maybe Ange said the same thing right before he died the first time.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So every once in a while, two films will share a bond to transcend time, space, and even genre. These similarities go down to their DNA. So let's dissect and deconstruct, compare and contrast. Let's go Criss Cross.
Criss Cross.
This is going to be fun, comparing these two. One tries to do something that the other one runs away with.
Oh, gosh, yes.
And it's all about that end reveal. Before I get to that, though, let's do the more simple things. Genre-wise, these are two separate genres. One is melodrama, but the other one is a puzzle box movie, basically a mystery.
Psychological thriller.
Yeah, psychological thriller, but to get more precise of how it works, you'd call it a puzzle box movie, because that's basically Nolan's genre. Nobody else does this, or at least not like him. I'm sure there's been attempts, but
we should note real quickly, he does have an assist in one respect, because this is based upon a novel by Christopher Priest,
right,
who is such a great fit. I've never read The Prestige, but I've read some of his other books, and he is he uses disjointed timelines, questions of identity.
I didn't even know that. Yeah.
The marriage is so perfect. I honestly don't know why Nolan doesn't adapt more of his novels.
Yeah, Priest handpicked him to film this, so
good choice.
That is interesting. That I think it's mostly that Nolan likes to do his own original ideas, but so to get into the actual breakdown of how they function differently. Basically, The Prestige does its homework. Illusionist does none. And it comes in at the last day exam and expects you to buy whatever thing it does, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But
it's like they're so interested in the melodrama, they don't care to explain the operations.
Right.
And I don't know if that's because the writer couldn't figure out how to do it as a writer.
No, I think it's okay. I can explain this real quick. This is going to be in my Facets of Story Mystery episode, which is coming out this next month. But basically, Sherlock Holmes, the Robert Downey Jr.'s ones do this too, of it's not a real mystery. They don't give you anything for the whole run length of the movie. And then they hold it all back to their chest, and then they reveal everything at the very end. And they expect you to be like, oh my goodness, it's such an amazing thing. It's like, no, you did none of your homework. And Nolan does it perfectly. He shows how every trick functions.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that does is it grounds you in reality, which is Nolan, that's his thing. But then when the things that transcend reality come in, like the Tesla stuff, it really hits. And that's why, because you're firmly planted in reality. You're not just seeing another magic trick that just seems like real magic, like the Illusionist. And it's like, okay, he's just he's not a magician. He's a sorcerer.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, he can just do magic. It's like, you get nothing from that.
Yes.
Well, you ground it in reality you know exactly how these tricks function. And then when something breaks the bond of reality, you're awed by that.
Yes. And Prestige does that so well.
The way that Nolan does this is he sets it up from the very beginning. And it's in this framing mechanism that he uses the journals. And this is similar to the framing mechanism of Paul Giamatti being the narrator, but it does it so much better. Of these dueling journals, and you know exactly. Okay, another director that would be trying to do a Nolan thing, which the other guy that did Illusionist, I'm sure wasn't, because Nolan was so new at that point. He was just doing his own thing. But if you were trying to do a Nolan thing, you'd have the temptation to confuse your audience. And it's not about that. It's about orienting your audience. And he does that by doing starting it with this one specific moment at the end of Act 2 of, I'm part of the bloody act, you fool. And we see the big lightning machine act that's the big capper of the movie of why you'd want to go see this movie. And they start it with that. So we know where we're going. And Illusionist kind of does that too. It does, but it doesn't lead up to it. It doesn't have the interspersed journal scenes that slowly orient you. One goes linear from the beginning to the end of the second act, and then the journals are interspersed throughout, and you eventually catch up.
When you get in the Illusionist, you get the flashback. It's largely it can only be from Ul's perspective. And this is where one of the things I found so genius about the use of the journals is that you can have Borden's perspective and Angier's perspective, but at the same time, there is a perfectly rational explanation why they are being deceptive.
Right.
Because they're written for an audience of one, and they're written to both trick the reader and at the end to reveal the trick as a way of
as a one-upmanship thing, and
it's such a
and it lands because it does its homework. You've got these journals all the way through,
and it's not implausible. It's not like, oh my gosh,
it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Exactly.
Yeah, I got to read this book though. Now, this concept of dueling magicians is that's where the energy comes from in this movie, and you've just got the one magician that's just kind of, nothing about him, and intentionally wise. 2/3 of the movie, you don't know who this guy is, what he's about, and by the end, you're expected to care that he pulled off this clever thing. It's like, I don't care about this character.
And who's he pulling it off against? Is he pulling it off against a guy who has no scientific background, can't explain these things, who really is outmatched? Or is he pulling it off against an inspector who secretly likes him and is willing to aid him in so many ways, and ultimately at the end sort of just excuses everything that's been done? There's no sense of the contest is unequal.
Yeah. So there's no satisfaction when you get there.
Exactly. Even though Leopold has all these resources and everything, and even though he's fighting for the age, there's just a sense of that, there's no sense of that tension of, will Eisenheim pull off? You go through, when I watched Prestige, I had no idea not only how the trick was done, but who's going to come out on top. And in a way, you can argue one or the other, or both, or none.
Yeah, and the thing, though, that makes it work is once you get to there and the puzzle box clicks into place and it opens and reveals, it's like, oh, that makes perfect sense. because it's done its homework. It's been set up all this stuff, and then it finally, it's like a lens. I want to say kaleidoscope, but that's not the right thing. Yeah. It's like this is not a thing that exists. But if there was like a puzzle box lens that if it slid into place and now you can see, and it's like glasses, you can see clearly, and it's like, oh, that I see that.
It's like those when you go to the optometrist and you have those machines.
Oh yeah. That's a perfect metaphor.
That's what it is. The other thing that kind of bothers me about it, though, is that while Nolan puts the time into that, and the people behind the Illusionists do not.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you get in return for? What do they spend that time doing instead? And that's where it feels like it's a real waste, because if the melodrama is built around the relationship,
there's not much to that relationship.
Yeah. And here I think, part of it, and I think that's a failure on so many levels. I've never known Edward Norton to do romance well. I can't think of a movie where he's been a great romantic lead. Jessica Biel is,
she's beautiful, but I don't know.
She's not exactly I don't see her contending for an Oscar anytime soon.
Right.
And so it's like it's almost like he's admiring her as an objet d'art and remembering this great this flirty relationship many decades in the past.
Right.
And so, okay, why not build up the romance, the melodrama? It's like they wrote themselves into a corner. She's in a position where she can't do that unless she's free of Leopold, and they pull that off. But instead of having them develop the relationship and seeing where that would, which might have been a better movie, we're going to go ahead and spend the rest of the movie basically beating up on.
And what it translates to in runtime is there's just so little happening during this movie. You're just waiting for something to happen, and I don't know.
Well, so much of you're waiting to get to the point where you left off. I mean, at the beginning. Where, okay, so
that can be it's done a lot, especially in TV. Nolan kind of did it differently. Well, okay, see, there's a name for it. I can't remember it, but you start later on in the story, and then you build or you go through linearly and get to that point. Nolan does it differently. Of the flashbacks go and then they line up with the linear line. But for Illusionist, the reason it doesn't work is because this could work for like an action movie, like Mission Impossible 3 does this great. You want to know how they got to this crazy moment, but it's not really that crazy of a moment that they give to begin with. And do they even show that it's her that he's conjuring in that scene?
I honestly
at the beginning, I don't think they do.
I think it's
that
just
would have added more emotional stakes, and you'd be like, "Oh, she's dead. How did she end up dying?" That might have made it work.
Plus, it would have made when you see the adult Sophie later during the first performance, when Eisenheim and Sophie meet again, in the present, it would have you would have clicked and instantly picked up on her, because until then you don't realize she's Sophie until a little bit later on.
Yeah.
Again, it's just not as finely executed.
And I think that's the biggest, the biggest instinct as a writer that you have to hold off against, that I still fall into, of just holding things back for clever reveals, or of just being clever. It's like, oh, I'm telling them too much. You are not telling them too much. You have to be clear of what is going on, because you're just going to end up with I don't want to. Okay. With the Illusionist, you end up with this thing of all this nothing, and for this big clever reveal at the end that doesn't even land because you haven't seeded it in there.
And there's a question of, was that because the writer was not interested in seeding it in there? Was it because they didn't know how?
That's more like it.
Yeah.
Like, if you can't write a mystery, an easy way to write it is like, these are action movies, the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes. So I can forgive them for this, but they do those big clever reveals of they don't show you any of the clues going up to it.
Yeah.
So there's no way you can figure out the mystery. And then they're like, voila. It's like, well, you didn't give me anything.
Yes.
So that could be the dumbest plot ever. And you reveal it at the end, and it seems kind of clever, but it's not.
It seems unearned.
Yeah, that's the biggest word for unearned. Okay, so I've got one more note for Criss Cross. Oh no, I covered that. So cool. Yeah, it's a fun episode.
Oh, it was. And well, I mean, for all that for all my criticism of The Illusionist, it's not a terrible movie.
No, it's not. It's a decent movie.
It's a decent movie, and in that sense, it was enjoyable to see. But you know what? That's a film I'm one and done. I don't really feel a need to go back, even though. I mean, for me, it's there's an element of disappointment because it feels like there's so much in the film to like that feels wasted. I mean,
Right.
the actors are good. They clearly put a lot of attention into the setting.
Yeah, it all comes down to the writing. If you don't have good writing, you
Yeah.
can't
It
save
just
it.
doesn't quite work. And I feel like I've seen it and I've got that Giamatti performance. But if I want to see a Giamatti performance,
Just watch another Giamatti movie.
yeah, exactly, because he has so many great performances. Whereas this one is Prestige. I feel like I could watch a dozen times.
Oh yeah,
and constantly pick.
that's
up
one of
things.
those movies that Nolan likes to do. This layered thing of it has instant rewatch value.
Yes.
and you could. I've watched this many times, and even this time, and you've pointed out things that I didn't notice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed stuff that I hadn't before.
It's kind of like one of the side pleasures of a puzzle box, which is when the little details you pick up on that you missed the first few times.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get to our ratings of The Illusionist.
On the 5-point scale,
Yeah, 5 stars.
3.
Okay.
Which to me it's an average movie.
Yeah, that's a decent score.
Yeah. So
Okay, I would give it a 2.5 because it's so close to. I mean, it for me 3 stars is a movie that's worth watching again. 2.5 is broken, but there's something enjoyable to it. 2 stars, I'd give like a Suicide Squad, where it's just a mess, but I'd only watch it to learn from it.
Yeah.
But 2.5 is right in that niche where it is.
I really try to avoid the half stars because I feel like I'm fudging the 5-point scale.
Yeah.
But that being said, I agree completely with your assessment. And if I did
Okay.
go the half star route, it would be a 2.5-star movie for me. I just feel like at the end of the day, I got to give it a bit of a nudge and say 3 because it's not because if it was on there, I wouldn't go. I've already seen it. I'm not going to see it again. I could see myself watching it a second time, admittedly some distance and
Yeah.
maybe
And that's what I did this time. So yeah.
maybe while I'm scrolling on my phone, checking the internet while it's going on for all the easily missable moments.
Right. Okay. Rating for The Prestige.
Oh, easily a 5.
Yeah, 5 for me too. This is my favorite Nolan movie, which is saying a lot.
It for me too. It was. I mean, there are Nolan movies I love. Inception for me is so rewatchable.
Right.
Oppenheimer, I'm really looking forward to diving into again soon. But this, just to see if it's just how rewatchable it is. But I think Prestige has eclipsed them. And what really fascinates me is the fact that he did this between the first and the second Batman.
Oh yeah,
movies.
it's so crazy. Like he put together this amazing script between the most popular Batman movies, and it's like, how do you do that?
Yeah, it's occasionally you see on the internet people talking about, throwing out the question of who had like the best, film run of great films.
Oh
done.
right, yeah.
And
Nolan's got it. There's one in there which I'm not going to spoil.
yeah,
but yeah,
but I mean, I can think of others who you could argue, but I mean, it's really difficult to compete when he goes and he does, Batman Begins, and then he does The Prestige, and then he does. I mean, Dark Knight Rises was a bit of a fall off, but then you have Inception.
yeah. I like that more than most people, but yeah.
Yeah,
I
so.
agree. It's not one of his best. Yeah. So Nolan sometimes gets, and I feel very unfairly judged for not being an emotional filmmaker. This movie and Inception both prove that very wrong.
Oh yes,
And I think this is where he's reached the strongest balance between the heady puzzle box things and the strong moral, the strong emotional foundation. I just feel it's great the way that he does it.
but I have to say it really helps that he has the caliber of actor in it. I mean, and there's so many actors who are in it. And we talked about Andy
Yeah, it's
Serkis. We didn't
amazing.
talk about Rebecca Hall.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
it's the wife Sarah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the performances are so good. I mean, I know I've been criticizing Scarlett Johansson's accent, but that's
Her
like
acting
the one,
was pretty good, though.
her acting was
Yeah.
pretty good. I mean, she sold the fact that she was initially drawn to Angier. She sold her frustration when she felt like she was being tossed aside. She sold her attraction to Borden, and she sold that. Well, we didn't talk about this, but her subsequent alienation from him.
Right.
And it's again, I mean, they really take the material and realize it in a way that actors of who aren't quite as good as they are might not have done.
Right. So, yeah. So our next episode, these two movies may appear to have no connection whatsoever, but it goes down to their storytelling bones, their DNA. Psycho and The Place Beyond the Pines. And it will be interesting to see if you pick up on what the connection is, Mark.
Well, now I'm going to be looking for one really hard.
Yeah. Okay, if you enjoyed today's episode, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/transcendentertainment. That's TRANSCEND Entertainment. And that's today's episode of the Criss Cross Cinema Podcast.
But you wouldn't clap yet, because making something disappear isn't enough. You have to bring it